Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to do the red threaded 1860s Gored corset pattern. I'm not going to go into sizing too much, but down here they do have the sizes listed based on your measurements, and it is extremely important to follow their instructions to make sure that you get the correct sizing for this pattern. Also, they have a recommended material section here. I decided to do a 1-layer corset utilizing coutil. There's also clear instructions on how to cut out your fabric and also edge your fabric with bias tape or serging, which I have already done here. I decided to use bias tape and not serge, following the instructions listed. I felt that it was pretty clear and didn't need any further explanation, so I'm not going to go into it here. So first we're going to insert our busk. The busk is just the metal closure at the front of a corset that consists of one piece of hooks and one piece of knobs. They just fit into each other and hold the corset secure and allow you to get out quickly once you are in the corset. So we're going to take our quilting ruler and a heat erase pen and mark a line a 1/2 inch from the edge of the center front of the corset. We're going to do this to both the left and right front panels. So the hooks are going to go on the left side of the corset and the knobs are going to go on the right side of the corset. So we're going to start with the hook. So I'm going to take the hook and line them up against the edge of the corset and draw a line in between each of the hook. And then I like to do an extra step of drawing around each of the hooks so that I have a bit more of a visual of where these are going to go when I'm sewing, but you don't have to do this part. Next, we're going to take our busk facing, which I cut mine out of this green satin brocade. Ignore that, it should be coutil, but I couldn't find the rest of my coutil when I was cutting this pattern out, so I just cut it out of something somewhat sturdy. So we're going to take this busk facing and line it up against the center front edge of our panel and pin it in place. You want to pin from the side you will be sewing, and those lines are our sewing guide. Then we're going to take this to the machine and sew along the line, skipping over the areas where the hooks are going to go. So you'll have several individual stitching lines on this section. But we are going to flip the busk facing inward so that now wrong sides are facing wrong sides, and we're going to take an iron to that so that we get a nice crisp edge and our heat erase pin is removed. You're going to take your waist tape and sandwich it between the coutil and the busk facing. We're going to take the hooks and slide it through the gaps that we made while sewing. And we're going to pin the busk facing tightly over the busk so that it is held snugly against the edge of the corset, capturing in the waist tape that we pinned in place. Using a zipper foot, we're going to stitch very close against the bust to hold it tightly in place. Next, we're going to move on to the right side of the busk. I've already sewn the busk facing to this piece, ironed it in place, and pinned the waist tape. So to make sure that the knobs lined up, I'm actually going to line the hooks over onto the right panel, and then I'm going to use my heat erase pen and draw a circle in the center of each hook so I know where each knob needs to go. And then I'm going to take an awl and I'm going to use this to poke through the coutil, and only the coutil, not the busk facing, slowly separating the fibers of the coutil and trying not to snap any of the threads. I'm going to do this for every mark that I made. And then I'm going to iron away my pin marks. And from the back side sandwiched between the busk facing and the coutil, I'm going to slide the busk and push the knobs through the holes that I made. It may be a bit of a tight fit, but that is exactly what you want. So just work those knobs through the holes until you have them all in place. And then just like the left side, we're going to pin the busk facing tightly against the busk itself. And then again, using a zipper foot, we're going to stitch very closely to the busk to hold this in place. And then just a little something that I do as a precaution that you don't have to do is I take some fray check and I put it around each of the knobs. It's just an extra precaution to strengthen the hole that we made and keep anything from fraying if I happen to break any of the fibers with the awl. And that is the busk. Time to move on to the bust gussets. So next I need to mark my gusset slashes directly onto my front panel pieces. So I just cut the slashes into my paper pattern piece and I'm folding the center part out of the way and then tracing the actual slash lines on each side. So with my quilting ruler, I'm going to mark a stay stitch guideline 1/8 of an inch outside of the gusset slash on both the left and right side. And then I'm going to use a short stitch and follow this guideline to ensure that the fabric is held in place and does not stretch out. Additionally, I'm going to take the actual bust gussets and mark a 3/8 of an inch line from the edge and use a long stitch to baste along this guideline. After completing my stay stitching, I'm going to cut right down the gusset line that I had drawn on previously. Flipping the corset so that we're working from the wrong side, I am going to roll the edges of the gusset slash inward very slightly, making sure my stay stitching is rolled to the inside of the corset. And I'm just going to use my fingers to press it in place and then take an iron to secure the fold in place. This gives us the nice clean edge along the slash line. Now I'm going to take my gusset pieces and I'm going to insert them into the slashes. The long sides of the gusset should be facing each other, with the curved side facing away from each other. So that means that the long side will be in the middle of the bust. So I'm going to place this on the wrong side of the corset and then I'm going to pin in place from the right side, making sure that the stay stitching of the gusset piece is not visible from the outside of the corset. And then you're going to top stitch in place very close to the folded edge of the gusset slash. And then to finish off the raw edges of the gusset slashes, you're going to top stitch a second time at about 1/8 of an inch away from your first stitch. This will cause the excess fabric of the gusset piece to encase the raw edges of the slash. So now it's time to move on to boning. I'm just going to use my ruler to copy over the boning channel markings from the printed pattern piece directly onto my front panels using my heat erase pen. And using some pre-made boning casing that I purchased from corsetmakingsupplies.com, I centered that down the channel markings and pinned it in place. Now I only did this for the first 4 channels as they go directly underneath the waist tape. The yellow strip you can see on the end is some cotton twill tape that I had. I'm actually using that to stitch 2 side-by-side boning channels instead of using 2 pieces of the smaller pre-made boning casing. When stitching the pre-made boning casing, you're going to stitch very close to the edge of the casing to make sure there's enough room for the bones to slip through. For this piece of twill tape, to make the double boning channel, you're going to stitch very close to the edge of each side of the twill tape, and then you're going to do a 3rd stitch down the very center of the twill tape. This will give you enough room to have 2 boning casings for 1/4 inch wide spiral steel bones. Now it's time to attach the back to the front at the side seam. Pin the back to the front and stitch 3/8 of an inch in from the edge. You'll press the seam open and then press it towards the back of the corset and do an additional stitch from the front of the corset 1/8 of an inch in. Then we're going to, with right sides together, pin the hip gore to the corset. Then you'll sew the hip gore from the right side of the corset 3/8 of an inch away from the seam. So once we have the hip gore sewn to the body of the corset, we are going to trim away only the seam allowance from the body of the corset, not the hip gore. The instructions said to trim this down to about 1/4 of an inch. I actually went a little bit smaller. And then you want to clip only the body of the corset so that it'll lay flat. Then you'll press your seam allowance up towards the body of the corset so that the hip gore seam allowance covers up the raw edge of the body of the corset seam allowance. Then from the right side of the corset, you're going to do an additional stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, sealing in the raw edges in the same way that we did with the bust gore. So it's time to go back to the boning. I used twill tape for this double boning channel that runs diagonal on the back of the corset. Again, I'm going to treat it just like I did for the one on the front to create a double boning channel, and I use pre-made boning casing for the single bone channels. Now I only pinned these at the top because we do need to place the waist tape before we stitch these down. The way the waist tape goes into this corset is it goes over the first 2 single bones and then the double bone casing. So it goes over the first 4 bones. It goes under the bone that runs along the side of the corset down into the hip gore. And it runs under the boning that is on the back panel piece that goes down into the hip gore. It should not overlap the double bone casing on the back piece. And then stitch your boning in place just like you did on the front of the corset. And now we're going to move on to edging. Edging is where you cover the top and bottom of the corset with bias tape. So the way we're going to do this is we unfold the bias tape and line up the edge against the edge of the corset. Then we're going to stitch that into place. After that, we then fold the bias tape over the edge of the corset, folding the other folded part underneath itself so that all raw edges are encased. Only do the bottom edge for the time being because now we have to hop back to the boning. So you'll use either pre-purchased boning or cut your own boning, which is what I typically do. You can get a roll of spiral boning on Amazon for about $25 and it lasts over a couple of corsets, if not farther than that. I'm not going to go into detail here on how to cut spiral boning or how to cap it. I have an entire video dedicated to that, which I'll throw up in the cards and I'll put down in the description below if you want more detail on how to cut your own spiral steel boning. Once you have your boning cut, you're going to insert it into all of your boning channels, making sure to push it all the way down. That way you have plenty of room at the top to add the upper edging. Once you have all your boning inserted, complete the edging at the top of the corset in the same way you did the bottom. So now it's time to move on to the lacing panels. So we are going to fold the lacing panels in half and iron. Now we're going to mark our boning channels. Just copy them over from the paper pattern using a ruler to ensure they're straight. Then take this to your machine and stitch directly down those lines. The 2 pieces of fabric folded over will create boning channels, so we won't need to add anything extra. Next, insert your boning and finish the top and bottom edges with bias tape, just like you did on the main corset piece. And now we have our lacing panels ready to go for grommets. So I'm just going to transfer over the placing of the grommets from the paper pattern onto the pattern piece by poking holes through the markings on the paper pattern and using my pen to transfer those markings over onto one of the panel pieces. Next, I'm going to take this handy dandy hole punch kit that I have that comes in multiple sizes. I just got this from Amazon. I honestly don't remember how much I spent on it, but it has been super helpful. I'm using 1/4 inch grommets, so I'm going to take the 1/4 inch cutter, line that up with the dot in the center of my cutter, and then I'm going to use a hammer and just punch out that hole. I'm going to do this all the way down and then copy these over onto the second lacing panel. Next comes grommets, which are super easy. You put the piece with the longer middle through the front of the fabric, and you take the piece with the shorter middle and put that on the back of the fabric over the piece of the grommet that was inserted through, and use the tool that came with the grommets to hammer them in place.
Hey, so comment that was placing and try on. I apparently didn't hit record whenever I tried this corset on after recording the grommet part of my video. So you're actually seeing the final product. So I actually had some gaping in the bust area that I had to take down. It was super easy. All I did was unpick this middle part of the bust gore and take the gores themselves and bring them in a little bit and stitch it back, and then it fit perfectly. So easy to adjust this type of corset. I was amazed. And then I added this lace detail to the top and the bottom just to give it a little more layer. But this is the fit. I am obsessed with the way this 1860s corset looks because these hip gores just make my waist look so small without tight lacing or anything. It's just the way it fits against my body. It just looks so nice. And now I'm wondering, can I use this in an upcoming build? This style of corset, at least the hip gores, just for the fit. I love this part. And my lacing down the back is great, which is what you want. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I hope that my experience helps you create your 1860s corset. I know sometimes those truly Victorian patterns are kind of hard to decipher. It takes me a little bit of time to decipher them, so I hope that I was able to help you along with this. So this is the first part of Scarlett O'Hara, and the next part is making an 1860s style of her dress. So make sure to stick around for that. If you like this video, hit the like button. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I will see you in a minute. Bye!